I'm going to show how to make this snowflake pattern using Affinity Photo's procedural texture filter. To make this pattern, I started with a symmetric coordinate system. I then used a dot product to create a basic shape that acts as a mask for the other patterns, and then I sort of put transposed other patterns on top of that mask and made multiple copies of them to get the final snowflake shape. So I sort of got the idea from the kind of snowflakes that you fold up in a piece of paper and then cut out with the scissors and then unfold to be surprised with the shape that you just made. To get started, I'll start with a new document and I'll choose XGA and then make it 1024 by 1024 pixels and make sure it's in RGB8 mode and create that, and then I'll fill it with black, choose the move tool and add a live procedural texture filter. I'll start by adding a single equation and assign it to the 3 colored channels. I'll add a real number input A and I'm going to label that scale and set it equal to 4. And I'll start with the coordinate system, which is VAR, V equals vec2, a 2-element vector consisting of relative x and relative y, and then I'm going to scale this up by multiplying by A, dividing by W, which is the width of the document in pixels. So that's what it looks like so far. The next thing I'm going to do is to convert this to a polar coordinate system, and so I'll use VAR, I'll call it VP for my polar coordinates. I'll set that equal to a vec2, and now I'm going to get the angle from my first coordinate system. So to do that I use arctangent2 function, and then get v.y comma v.x. So arctangent2 takes 2 inputs and returns value between minus 180 degrees and 180 degrees. And so I want it really to have a range from minus 1 to 1, so I'm going to divide by 180, which will bring it back into that range. And then for the second one, well, we'll have the radius, so this is the angle. Then for the second one I'll have the radius, which is just the length of v. So there's my polar coordinate system. Now I want to divide this up into different sections and also have them be symmetric. So the first thing, we'll divide it up into n different segments. And so I'm going to add a integer and I'll label that n. And I'm just going to have this be, I guess I'll call it segments. And I'll set it to 6 because I'm going to make a snowflake. And now I'm going to set up another variable. This is another coordinate system. This is going to be the symmetric coordinate system. I'll label it vn and set it to a 2-element vector, vp.x minus round of vp.x. And I'm going to tweak this up a little bit, but that'll be the first one. And then the second element is just vp.y again, so that one doesn't change. The radius doesn't change. The angle is going to go through this transformation. So there's what that looks like. In order to get this to be affected by the n, I'm going to multiply each of these by n. So n times vp.x over here, and inside the round I'm going to multiply that by n. And there's that. And I can see that I have more than 6. So I'm going to go down to, so there's 6 when I set this equal to 3. And I don't want that. I want it to be 6 when it's equal to 6. So what I need to do is to divide this by 2. So each place I have an n, I'm going to divide it by n divided by 2. I can maybe set that up as a variable, but it's easier just to divide each of these by 2. Okay, so now when n is 3, I have 3 segments, 4, 5, 6. So there I have 6 segments, and that's how I want it. Now I want to have a mirror plane across the x-coordinate, which is my angle. And so in order to do that, I can just take the absolute value of this whole thing. So I'll just wrap this inside of an absolute value function, and there it gets reflected. I'm going to zoom in a little bit like that so it's easier to see. So that's the basic coordinate system, and so now I can change this to any value. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to leave it at 6. And now I need to create some sort of mask in here that's going to be the basis for my shape. And one way to do that is to use a dot product and put in an angle. So I'm going to have an angular input, and I'll just call it th for theta, and I'll just label this angle. And in order to do this, I'm going to add a vector called variable v1 equals vec2, and I'm going to put in the a unit vector of cosine of theta, sine of theta, cosine of th, comma, sine of th. And I know this is a unit vector because the cosine squared plus the sine squared equals 1. So if I take the amplitude of this vector, it'll be equal to 1 if I use cosine and sine. So that's sort of a slick trick to get the angle into a unit vector. Now I'm going to take the dot product of my Vn, my symmetric V, and V1, and I'll just see what that looks like. So there it is, and it has these things going off, but as I change the angle, I start to get different shapes, and there you can see sort of a rounded star or flower shape, and then I can also get almost a hexagon shape in between here, right about there. So I'm going to use that, and it isn't perfect, but it'll make a decent snowflake shape. Let's set this to 60 for now. And I want it to be a mask, and so I'm going to do a smooth step around this. And so, and I'm also going to set this up as a texture. So I'm going to set this up as a variable t1 equals smooth step n of e comma e plus s, and I'll add those in a second here. And so that's like that. And so I've got to add two 0 to 1 range inputs. I'll label the first one E and the second one S, and this will be the edge, and then this will be sort of a smoothing function that will smooth off the edge. Now it's all white. Let's see if I can get anything. Okay, so there's the edge. I'm going to bring the smoothness all the way down to get started, and then I can adjust this to bring up different edges here. And then I can also change this, and I think I'll just leave it a little bit more like that. Now I also, sometimes I like to have sort of a hole in the middle, so when I cut these out of paper, I often cut off the end, so I'm going to have a hole in the middle, and I'm going to use that. One way to do something sort of similar is to subtract a value from this. I'm going to use I, and I'm going to add a 0 to 1 slider for I, and I'm going to call this the offset. And I'll just bring it down to 0 for now, but I could make that bigger. And then I want to take the absolute value of this whole thing. So that will sort of flip that internal part upside down. It'll give it an edge, actually. And so when I bring this up, it'll be an interior. And let's see, if I bring this down, yeah, I can have like, this one, it sort of becomes the thickness of it. Then I have this hollow part in the middle. So that's how I want it. I have a little hollow part in the middle if I want. So this is going to be my basic mask that I'm going to use, and then I'm going to apply different textures on top of this. Now the first texture I want to apply is cell noise. So I'm going to make another texture variable t2, and I'll just use the cell noise, and the one I like is dist. It's a little bit like a crystalline structure, and it takes two individual x and y coordinates, so you have to put in these individually. So I'm going to have vn.x and vn.y as my x and y coordinates, and I'll just put one in for the third parameter like that. And so that gives me this pattern. Now it'd be nice to be able to move it around, and so to do that I can just put in a real number here, b, and I can add b to x. And so when I click on B, it jumps around and it changes quite a bit as I move this. If I zoom out a little bit, you can see this a little better. So it almost reminds me of a kaleidoscope when it's in this mode. And I could put in some colors and make this more kaleidoscopic, but that's pretty good for now. Then I might want to also change the other component, this y component, which is the radius. And so I can multiply that by c, and I'll just put in a c value down here as a real custom input. And as I bring that up, I sort of get more stripes. Bring it up too much, I get most of these lines, but I can bring this down, and it looks like that. So I'll call this one the cell noise offset, and I'll call this one cell noise, let's call it lines. Now for my pattern, I'm just going to multiply T1 times T2. That'll sort of use the mask I created in T1 and this pattern I created in T2 to create this pattern. And I can just scroll through here until I find something that I like. It looks sort of crystalline, so I'm just going to stop with that one. Now I'm going to add a third texture, and that is going to be, I'll just delete this for now, and that'll be a variable t3, and for that one I'm going to use an oscillator. So I'll use osc vn.x plus vn.y. It looks like that. If I zoom out, it has this repeating structure. Some snowflakes have this sort of dendritic, feathery material on the edges, and so I'm going to use this to make that. Now I think I experimented with the oscillators a little bit, and I found that the one I like the best here is RTI. So I'm going to use that one, just sharpens it up a little bit, and then I need to put some parameters on this, so I'm going to add two more real inputs, D and F. So I'll multiply my X by D, and I'll multiply the Y by F. So as I bring this one up, it'll add more lines, so I'm going to have this be oscillator lines. And then as I bring this one up, it causes more of an angle. So I'm going to bring this down a little bit. Yeah, so this changes the oscillator angle. Okay, so there's my basic oscillator, and then now I'm going to go back to my other pattern, and I can have T1 times T3. like that. And then if I change these a little bit, I can get different sort of effects with these. I sort of like it like that. Lots of these coming off. Yeah, just like that. Now I want to combine these, and so one other thing I might want to do is to be able to rotate this a little bit independently. I can rotate it with this theta control. I think I'd like to have another rotation on there. So I'm going to add in another angle input. I'm going to label it pH for phase. So I'm going to have a phase offset, and it turns out I can put that phase offset right in here after I get the arc tangent, and it will allow me to rotate this. So if I add, before I divide by 180, I'm going to add a phase offset pH in there like that. And now I should be able to rotate this shape to any angle. So I'm going to want that later. Now I have it set up, and so instead of trying to put it all into one formula, I'm going to duplicate this like that, and then I can mess around with these and change it. So first thing I'm going to do is, I think for my base, I'm going to go back to T2. And then I'm just going to turn this one off for a minute. And it looks a little dim. I'm going to scale that up a little bit. So I'm going to, maybe I'll add a slider for that. I'll just add a I2 slider so I can adjust the intensity of this. So I'll just call it intensity. And I'll multiply this thing by I2 times that. Now it's still, even at the maximum, it's a little bit dim, so I'm going to multiply this by 2 and see how that looks. So right now it's not all the way up to the top, and so I could go, let's multiply it by 3. So now it's hitting the maximum brightness there, and so I'll leave it like that, and I can always bring it down again if I want to. Alright, so that's pretty good. Now I'm just going to delete this one since I added some new stuff to it, and duplicate it again. Okay, so now on this one I said I wanted to use the third formula, so I use T3. And on that one, I don't need to multiply it by this 3 factor. Okay, so these are different now. And now I'm going to change it from normal to one of the overlay modes. And you can do, I'm going to use screen, I think. And now for this one, I added in that phase offset, and so I can adjust the phase, and so these are not aligned, and that'll make a little bit nicer pattern for it. And then I'm also going to change this so it's not exactly the same, and then I can add in maybe a few more lines. And let's see, I think another good one was difference, and you can just choose, you know, which one looks the best to you. There's a lot of different patterns you can get just by changing the different overlay modes here. I think I'll use difference for this one. So that looks pretty good. And then the only other thing I'm going to do is to add a adjustment layer of a gradient map. And I had one I did for some snow a while ago, so I'm just going to use that one. And so there's my gradient map for that one, and it just goes from sort of a dark blue and then fades up to white. I can drop that on top of this one. And you can add more layers if you want to and do some other stuff with these, but that's all I'm going to do for today. So that's how I made a snowflake. So Couple of things about this. One cool thing I think is this coordinate system that's symmetric like that. I think you can create some cool effects with that type of coordinate system. I've messed around with the dot product. There's some ways to change the angle so you can get rid of some of these rounded edges and make them straight, and do some other stuff. I think I multiplied by the radius to get them to straighten out a little bit. So you can do some other things with that. Let me know if you come up with any other cool things that you can do with this pattern or with that coordinate system. And let me know if you have any comments or questions. And thanks for watching.